Welcome to episode 25 of Conversations for the End. Today's guest is Jared Black. Jared is a former Marine Corps officer, wrestler, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt, currently studying depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute. His work explores grappling and combat sports as modern forms of initiation, where aggression, injury, and limitation become sites of psychological integration. He is particularly interested in trauma healing, men's initiation, and the responsible use of psychedelic therapies for PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. This was a fantastic way to start 2026. I'm a huge fan of Jared and what he has to say. He's got some incredible insights, and most importantly, I think he's lived a life, and I think that is one of the key tenets of individuation. We can be in the books and stuff all we want, but if we don't go out there and experience life and experience what life has to offer, both good and bad, then it's very difficult to kind of develop and to unfold and to utilize these ideas. And I think Jared has certainly lived a life, and I'm really excited to see what he has to offer Jungian scholarship. I think if he chooses to go down that path, he's going to be a really interesting voice with some really interesting things to say. So I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I do. Please follow on the Instagram and the TikTok, subscribe on YouTube. You can follow on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and a handful of the other audio platforms too. But yeah, this is it. Okay, so first episode of 2026. I've got some great guests on the way this year, so I look forward to you all hearing that. But without further ado, Jared Black. Jared, welcome to the show.
Thank you, bro. Thank you for having me.
First episode of 2026. Pleasure to have you. So let's dive into it. Okay, so I am curious a little bit about your personal myth, your story. I think it's a fascinating one, and how you have moved from, I guess, combat sports in various ways through the military into now studying before then going into kind of plant medicines, and now starting to study Carl Jung. So to just tell me, I guess in your own words, about your story, your kind of
Yeah.
arc as you see it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you touched on being a student at Pacifica, and that's a recent unfolding where I kind of just found this program. But as I unravel the story, it came from a trip that I went to Peru in 2024, where I sat with the Shipibo tribe and did ayahuasca, sat with ayahuasca, and met a group of people that I just fell in love with, just soul family type people. And yeah, everything kind of came out of that. But I mean, you keep pulling it further, and it's just like I went to that because I got out of the Marine Corps and I went through a pretty big life transition, which was a divorce. I married my high school sweetheart. We were together for 13 years. So that I'm just painting the picture of it was just like a enmeshed relationship. And it was in that transition time where I was like getting out of the Marine Corps, got broken up with. And then it's kind of the last thing that I had. And the reason I got out of the Marine Corps really was to focus on jiu-jitsu full time, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, grappling. Yeah, like fortunately, the U.S. government does a pretty good job with the Veterans Affairs for setting us up for schooling afterwards. So I had graduate school in my mind, although like I will say I joined the Marine Corps, so like I academically, like, like I was like, I'm very disciplined and I'm smart and other things. Not, but I came out of undergrad with a very low GPA. Like, it really felt like only the Marine Corps was going to accept someone like me. So it actually felt similar with Pacifica, where it was like, I think Pacifica looks for um, personality and different areas of life and versatility, and like these, just, yeah, I think that they were kind of intrigued by me as I went into the interview process. So didn't really bother them too much that I didn't crush it in undergrad. But yeah, and I mean, just keep pulling the threads back, and it's like, I joined the Marine Corps because, yeah, I got married and I was unprepared, and like I didn't have a plan, and I wanted to wrestle for a career, and like the Marine Corps had a wrestling team. It was a very low percentage chance that I was going to get onto the wrestling team, but I made all the right moves. I made all the right connections. I contacted people before I even got into the Marine Corps, and I set myself up for success. And ultimately, I ended up on the Marine Corps wrestling team. And, I was unprepared for marriage because all I cared about was wrestling in college. That was my full-time job, it felt like, And I went to a really, say cool, I had a very unique undergraduate experience at Wheaton College. It's in the suburbs of Chicago, West Chicago. It's a private Christian school. They call it the Harvard of Christian schools. Like, it is a liberal arts college. It's like Billy Graham, if you know that name, is big on the evangelical movement. He was like, I think he was Ronald Reagan's spiritual advisor. Like, one of the wrestling alumni was the Speaker of the House at one point. Like the third most powerful person in the U.S. Like, came to our wrestling meets. So I had a very interesting experience, and I went to Wheaton because my dad was my coach. He was the guy, the Rock, in the whole wrestling story. And he found Coach Grunwald, and Jim Grunwald's this 2-time Olympian, Greco-Roman wrestler. And it wasn't anything about Wheaton. It was literally, it had everything to do with Jim Grunwald, where it was like, my dad wanted to put me in front of strong men and Christian men, and that was his uh, bent on everything, was keep me in a Christian environment, which I was open to. I was, rebelled against that for sure at one point, and that pulled the thread, and that's where all the psychedelics and stuff come from. But I also was in a place where I really wanted to get good at wrestling. I really wanted to learn how to like be disciplined in this sport and have success, and that's where having some structure around religion was actually pretty helpful for someone like me who has like a wild side of me that would just like, like so many parts of my life, I was on the edge of going off the rails, and I think most people get that. And I think we can talk more about where that's like the unconscious shadow side of the warrior archetype, of being a man, of being, that's kind of maybe what would be called toxic masculinity, uncontained, that kind of thing, the energy. And so I would just say that it was the wrestling that kept me contained.
Hmm.
Like, I was dealing with all the stuff as I was going through, and then and that brings me in, maybe the last part is the drugs, the rebellious side. It was like, before I really chose wrestling, or it chose me or whatever, like it saved me or whatever, I was on the path of overdosing with pharmaceuticals. So opioids, like that was big in our area. It was like pills, man. Like, and I will just say, and I watched one of your videos, man, and I'm so sorry about your brother. And I know it's been a while, and it's been a while for me too, but my brother overdosed on pills. And when I was a freshman, so my first year at university. And uh yeah, it was wild. It's the whole thing, and then our older cousin, who kind of got him in, was his older brother figure. He overdosed 2 years before him. And yeah, man, pills were just an issue. And so I will say, making meaning out of things, and what I've found to be true for me, is that in college, I went back to that rebellious phase and started to really question the medical system, to really question our government, like question everything. And I really was questioning the school I was at, the Christian culture that seemed fake most of the time, although there were, beautiful people in it. you know, it was like same with the Marine Corps. It's all BS. Like the whole system's, for lack of a better words, messed up. Like, you know what I want to say. So it's like, can I swear on here? Like, I don't know. Like,
Yeah, no, you can swear away.
it's fucked. Like, it's really fucked. So yeah, man, I just, but then again, going back to, there's beautiful people in it, and there's good people in all these organizations and whatnot. And so I'm not like, you know, I'm so grateful for it. But, you know, before yeah, like, and this was early, this was like 13, 14 years old. Like it was not good, you know? And so, um, yeah, you know, so then that time period where I was into the pills and all the things, wrestling really got me like locked in. I was like, oh no, I really want to be locked in on wrestling. And I disciplined myself and started dating my future wife in high school and just locked in, you know, I was focused. And friends faded away, didn't have any issues with pills, pornography, those types of things went away for years.
Mm.
And then my brother died, and that triggered everything. Like the dominoes started falling. I had a year of like morning fog, that like I was in mourning and I was foggy. But my junior year of college and my senior year of college were very shadowy. I don't like now looking back with the language, like it was shadow material coming up, you know. So I
Yeah.
guess I'll just kind of leave it there and like see what yeah thoughts you have. But that kind of led into the psychedelics and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing, you know, particularly about your brother as well. And I extend the same feeling back to you. It's interesting the way you talk about it. A few things come to mind. So I like the way you talk about the structure of wrestling as a container to kind of perhaps contain this part of you that could be more rebellious, more kind of Dionysian in nature. I guess every warrior kind of has to have that, right? The sort of berserker kind of part of them. It needs to be um, contained. And yeah, that's interesting, but it's interesting how you see the kind of tension of perhaps a um, the unconscious, like you said, you've got these shadow elements that try and maybe come up for overcompensation. Like it's great if the psyche is this structured con- and contained as a result of the wrestling and the routine and the discipline. But as you said, there's these other parts where too much discipline, too much structure can hold restrictions, be it that kind of hyper focus where the
Mm.
warrior becomes kind of masochistic and perhaps cut
Mhm.
off from the kind of lover archetype that
Mhm.
is needed to sustain the whole. Um, so I think we should go into that. One thing I just want to touch on,
Yeah.
because you mentioned the passing of your brother,
Yeah.
and I wanted to take a minute just to talk about this idea of, you know, with warrior culture. One of the things you mentioned was that when it was on another podcast, when that happened, um, you were at Wheaton, right?
Yes.
And you talked about Jim Greenwald was your coach
Mhm.
at the
Yeah.
time. And I believe that when your brother passed away, your dad said to Jim and to perhaps to your sort of wrestling partners that you needed to be around them right now. Your dad is a pastor as well, right? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So am I right in saying that he said you needed to be around them in that
Yeah.
time, and that brotherhood was really important to you to kind of help contain, I guess, what would have been a very, very difficult experience? Can you just talk a little bit more about like brotherhood in that moment for you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't see it, but I'm glad he did. I don't think I would have went home and ended the semester. Personally, I think I would have been right in line with him, but it was really nice for him to say that I think it showed me a lot of strength that he had in that time, even though he was really beat up over it. Obviously, as any parent would be, you know. But yeah, like having the foresight for that, and it's just it. It was a moment for sure that seems kind of mystical, maybe it's the best way to describe it, but it's just like, you're in such a fog, and then the way that things transpire, but essentially the team just, they rallied, and everybody was present. Nobody had anything to say, but everyone was just there, like completely present. We just, it wasn't long after at all that the entire team was just around me, you know, grown men crying, you know, putting their hands on me, praying, those kind of things. I don't know what it did, but it was powerful. Not
Mm,
exactly sure, but it was a moment, left an imprint, and that is a testament to, yeah, the type of person that Jim Grunwald is, the type of team that he created, the atmosphere, the culture, because it wasn't just him; it's trickled out too. The school was very accommodating for that time for me too.
yeah, and I think it's a really nice example of, I guess, with the warrior archetype. I think it's something that perhaps is romanticized, and many people will view it or be possessed by this idea of the kind of lone warrior. The
Mm.
This idea of the hero's journey is obviously very popular, and it can feel like an isolated task, one that is romantically cut off from other human beings. We see this in a lot in that kind of, be it gym culture or that kind of self-development space of, focus, lock in, you do you, you're on the grind. But I think the importance of brotherhood, of connection, of containment from other people around you is crucial, right? And when more is that highlighted than when such a tragic rupture like the passing of your brother happens
Yeah.
unexpectedly, and like you say, people rally around and can contain that. And I think it was just obviously it's a tragic story, and again, I
Yeah.
feel for you because, as you know, I have my own experience of the loss of a brother. But yeah, it was pleasant to hear that you had that around you, at that time. And I think it was a good example of that brotherhood kind of being important.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And yeah, for as much as I think that Christian culture robs us of a feminine divinity, like a feminine god, that eros, that connection, that relational aspect, it's there, in the genuine authenticity, I think, of that a lot of people expressed, but the more I gravitate away from it, I think that is maybe the piece that's underdeveloped when it comes to brotherhood, and that's why it's so hard to have brothers, and that's why, it's in this culture. But I do feel like, jujitsu showed me, and Marine Corps has showed me all the ways in which it doesn't work when you don't have that relational aspect, and then all the ways in which it does flow and things can get done when you do have that aspect. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. 100%. Okay. So the other thing that I want to talk about is, I guess, this idea touched on just before, and I mentioned there about the brotherhood side of things. But you talked about on your journey, the idea of kind of structure, wrestling, whatever it may be, being this kind of container. But then there's this shadow side where perhaps other things come up. And from what you've said and what I've done in prep with you, you've obviously had your own kind of, you're able to have that dialogue with yourself and explore your inner world in a way that feels that you're comfortable in doing, right?
Mm.
Trials and tribulations along the way. And I think wrestling itself is such a solid analogy for, I think, perhaps how sometimes we need to look at engagement with our souls, so to speak. I did a video on this like not too long. I was kind of um, not bashing, but I was putting a mild, gentle critique towards some of the dialogue that I hear around men's mental health, which is men need to open up, like
Yeah.
go and talk to your barber about mental health. And it's like, hang on a minute, like maybe, like, but don't like
Mhm.
open up the unconscious onto your barber in the 30
Mhm.
minutes he's got to cut your hair and isn't
Right.
really trained. And then all this stuff floods out because it's not the kind of telling of the thing that is going to be the full catharsis that leads to healing and transformation. There is a wrestling that needs to take place
Yep.
with the contents that comes up, right?
Yes.
And I referred to Jacob, like Jacob in the Bible. His transformation did not come from just disclosure; it came from a wrestling with a hidden figure that left him wounded at the end of it.
Yeah.
Walking away with a bad hip.
Totally.
And I think it's a good analogy. Does that resonate with you? This idea of wrestling sort of on the mat and kind of in the inner world as well throughout your life?
Yeah, well, the first thing that's coming up is my brother's name is Jacob, right? So I've had like this idea of Jacob wrestling with God. My middle name's James, which in Hebrew is Jacob. So it's like there's like this wrestling motif, right? That is talk about myth or etymology or how things come to like I don't know, but like it is definitely unfolding. I do make sense of it that way, where it's looking back, and wouldn't say that I was like would be able to have articulated this in many other phases of my life, but it's like yeah, seeing it now, it's like the time spent training, um, allowed things to come up at a pace, in a way that, also I think fast forwarded things for me, like to process and all these things and let it come up through my body and somatically and all these things, but also too, like, there's so many times where I'm like and countless times where I've been training, you roll with one guy, the next guy, okay, you're exhausted, and then, like, everybody's exhausted, and then you're just hanging out, and you're like, what comes out is raw, authentic, like just stuff that is needs, is it's just like a good connect. It's basically healing. You're just like connecting with somebody after like this mental exhaustion. It's like, yeah, like a nod to like what they're dealing with, what you're dealing with, and then you go on about your day. It's like,
Yeah, I do think there is like a certain amount of, I don't necessarily want to say trauma, but let's just say like psychological contents that we may carry around in our day to day, in the tension in our muscles, in the kind of complexes that become activated, whatever the affect is that we feel from the stuff that's in the inner world. I think there's a certain amount of that inner content that can only be worked through somatically. I
yeah,
don't think it's possible to touch it and to reach it with just psychological dialogue alone. I
yeah,
think you need that kind of that physical element. And what you said there, like, rolling, drilling, whatever it may be, that kind of element of it. And then there's the pause, the space at the end where you're kind of sat there with it and the catharsis that perhaps takes place. Um, seems to be something that can only come from that interaction. Is that something you feel?
absolutely. Absolutely, man. And like, yeah, I mean, I can tie it even into the ayahuasca ceremonies where it's just like the somatic portion of it and how it comes up in your body is the most important piece, and it is this idea of purging, right? Like getting rid of old cells, whatever. Like we're doing it all the time. We're turning over cells, it's like you're a brand new person every 7 years or something, So it's like discard the bad and then what are you consuming to like build yourself up into, this yeah, maybe like your destiny or your fate or what you're meant for or whatever it is, that it's all there for anyways, So making meaning of it all and that kind of thing. And I also something that was coming up is there's been a very big bear myth that's come up for me, being from an area that is known to be like Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore. So that's where I grew up. I named my jujitsu gym Sleeping Bear Jiu-Jitsu, and now it's just kind of turned into a brand. I don't have a gym anymore. And so, and then I started beekeeping and just started doing all these things around like this like bear myth. And we were saying that I was like, the whole idea of the mat as a container and then brotherhood and tying it all together is like we actually under the right umbrella, under the right container, it's like we can actually bear each other's burdens, and witness each other in your maybe shadowy or unconscious as you're becoming conscious, as you're like sort of learning to integrate. Um, you know, it's like this space without judgment of just like understanding like we're all going through this type of thing. That I think has been really powerful for me, and I have seen like it's been very powerful for the veterans that I work with, and I think it's worth teaching, or at least worth like sort of explaining that like I think this is the what mainstream's trying to get at. Is like open up, talk to your barber, that kind of thing. Is like no, like yes, the idea is sound and that like yeah, you do want to process, you do want to feel these things, but give yourself a container, find the right container, um, and then work through it that way. So
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting as well. You talk about the kind of on the mat, the way things might come up. What came to my mind is I used to do a little bit of MMA back in the day. I will preface this for anyone listening who thinks, oh, that's cool. I was not very good. Okay. So I was getting choked out. I was wiped out, just getting choked out all the time. And I think back to those times and the idea of when things come up in real time. So if I was sparring with kind of the guy that helped get me into it, Fred Harrington, shout out to Fred. He sometimes listens to this stuff. He was, an MMA fighter, kind of semi-professional, doing quite well. And we'd train in his back garden. We'd like roll sort of no-gi in his back garden on these mats. And he would not hold back. He would, for the most part, like humble me again and again and again. And there would be these moments where like you'd feel that frustration come up. Like, why? Like, why? Like, why are you not letting me win? Basically, or like, this is annoying. Like, I'm getting annoyed because I'm just getting dominated here. And he would always kind of critique me for maybe being too like, I'm a long guy, right? 6'3", but I'm sort of gangly. And I'd be a bit kind of sluggish and yeah, kind of messy with my movements, right? And he would call me on that. And I think maybe sometimes when we were sparring, maybe I'd start throwing a punch a little bit harder because that frustration is coming up in me in real time and I'm unable to contain it. I'm unable. And I think fighting and that kind of combat sports is a really good place to see the stuff in real time. So you've got the catharsis maybe at the end, perhaps in the same way. I think it's quite similar to yoga actually in this sense. So, I've done a lot of yoga in my time. I did my teacher training on that.
nice.
The kind of shavasana at the end where you're lying down, corpse pose, that is where the kind of catharsis takes place. Perhaps in the same way at the end of like a rolling session, maybe in between partners, there's this kind of moment that arises there. But there's also the moment where you're in the pose, where the frustration of why aren't I flexible yet? All the thoughts that come running through your mind. And I think the idea of yoga is, yoga means union. You don't do yoga. The poses aren't yoga. You do the asanas to reach yoga effectively is sort of one way of phrasing it, right? And that's something I learned through that journey it was about not how you look in the pose. Like, how do you feel in the pose? Are you thinking you're frustrated because you can't get there? Or are you just allowing your body to move within the limits that it can so that the stretch is beneficial, so that your mind is clear, your breath is even? And I imagine that's the same for fighting, right? So like, are you throwing these punches harder at someone who is your brother, in your brotherhood or your partner? Are you getting angry because you're frustrated? Do you see what I mean? Like, you see how it comes up in real time?
I absolutely do. Yeah, I think that the difference, right, with yoga being you and your mind, right? And so you're in your mind like maybe a little bit more intensely, that it's like a singular focus, where jujitsu, when you're rolling with another person, and this is where my mind shifts to that singular focus, where it is actually the person in front of me is just a mirror. So whatever is coming up for me because of him is my own internal conflict, right? So I know that I flow better when I'm at peace. Like obviously preparation and all the things has a part of it. So it's kind of this funny back and forth between force and surrender with it really is inside of you, but with your opponent, and then also the portion of like the whole idea of the sport, which is to dominate, or at least to win, right? Like when we put containers and left and right limits, rules, and a referee, it's like, well, there's an objective, we go towards the objective. But ultimately, I think the more we can even just take away from the win or the loss and just focus on becoming a better person. This is what a lot of coaches focus on, is character development versus like, you can be the best, you can be the world champ, but if you're a piece of shit, like it's the same in the Marine Corps. You can be the best Marine, but if you're not a good dude, like you're not a team guy or, like, and I just I think it just resonates with people when you're like, sort of doing it for that like character development or whatever it is. It's like the authentic piece of like going to yoga or jujitsu is like you're there to really actually work through the things that are impeding your ability to show up and be in the community or be in the team or be in, and like help the team out too. Cause it's like, in my mind, it's like, it should always be a win-win situation. It's like you you and the team doing well, like you doing well should mean the team does well. When the team does well, it means you should do well. It's like life becomes life. So it's like it's a balance. Yeah, I guess that's where I'm at with it. It's just kind of a balance, to find that sort of peace.
Yeah, and you talked about that the this relationship with force and how you the warrior working with force. Where do you think, perhaps generally speaking, that men, let's go with men on this one. Where do you think men struggle with this relationship with force? What have you learned about the relationship with force and how it's through maybe your whole journey, through the kind of discipline of wrestling into the kind of, I guess, more expansiveness, surrender of psychedelics and plant medicines? How has your interpretation with the warrior's relationship with force kind of changed over time, do you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can say injuries as an interruption has been kind of this theme I've been playing with. I tore my ACL in high school, missed my entire senior year of wrestling. Like I was number one in the state. I was gearing up for a state championship run, that kind of thing. And blown, blown my ACL, surgery, all things. I missed the whole thing. And then there was like this kind of moment of like, well, I have to surrender, like there's nothing else to do. I can cry about it. And I cried about it and all the things. Um, so that kind of comes up for me. I tore my pec my senior year of college. And that time around, I just wrestled through it. And I wrestled with a torn pec at nationals. Those things really, when I took like a look at them later on, it was like, oh, there were other things in my life going on that like I was forcing. I was forcing a relationship with my high school sweetheart. That's probably the time frame we should have split off. We should have went our separate ways. And I don't know, it had the same sort of tones and undertones and themes around my pec tear and just different things I was doing at the time. And that, I mean, man, yeah, actually is fascinating. This is a wild part of the story, but yeah, my senior year, like I was getting investigated for all sorts of, um, let's just say like criminal activity while I was at Wheaton. Like I was, and I'll just say that, but it all kind of went under table in a way, and my coach was given the authority to deal with it the way that he wanted to deal with it, so that I don't think like Wheaton got put in the limelight. And it wasn't anything nasty or anything like that. It was around Bitcoin, and it was around ordering drugs to the school.
Right.
So I was exploring with MDMA, I was exploring with acid, I was exploring with and trying, really give myself a little bit of credit, was I was trying to do it in a way that I felt was responsible, and I could still do my things, and still wrestle. And I was trying to do it for performance, and I landed on a psychology major, which was like my fourth major I switched. And I ended up in psychology because I wanted to learn about sports psychology, or I wanted to be around things that would give me a better access to my mind, right? Like better tools and stuff. So like, long story short, I was like hustling, trying to figure out how to, survive and like buy a wedding ring and not go into too much debt. I was like coming out of college with $100,000 in debt, is like all this stuff, and I was just like, there's these things that just would like come up, and it's just energy that needed to be moved. And I, I, I guess I'm wondering if that's kind of tying into your original question now that I'm kind of
Mm.
going down that like rabbit hole.
Yeah, no,
But yeah,
definitely.
injuries for sure. And then just things that were coming up around those.
And do you feel that now that you've, been to the jungle, been spoken to by the plants, do you feel that perhaps some of those ways you would force parts of your life, perhaps the relational aspects of your life, right? Because it seems to me, at least from what you said, that you were very locked in on wrestling and you were
Mhm.
willing to wrestle with a torn pec. It would be, I will achieve this regardless of if I physically can,
Right.
regardless of the suffering, regardless of the sacrifice, I will do this kind of hammer nail kind of stuff. But
Right.
perhaps the kind of relational aspects, where maybe dialogue and maybe, a kind of softer approach where the hammer isn't needed, so to speak, you were maybe unable to allow that part of you to move through. Do you feel like the experiences with plant medicine has helped that kind of connection? I've heard you've talked about in some of the ceremonies, experiences around like your mother and like the feminine being quite prominent for you. And I'm curious as to how perhaps your relationship with, because I could speak for myself and say that in the experiences that I have had, perhaps with those forms of substances, it deepened my relationship to the kind of feminine, be it internally. And then I think that moved externally to a symbolic way of viewing the world. I talk a lot about seeing the feminine in the world. And one of the videos I did recently, I sort of joke about this idea of you can flirt with like the moon, And look, I say it kind of tongue in
Mm,
cheek, but it is
Interesting.
true. I think if
Interesting. Yeah.
you can if you can hold symbolic space for the feminine in you and meet it with genuine reverence. And I don't think you can fake that reverence. I think if you don't respect the feminine and you pretend to, that will become clear at some point.
Yes.
But holding
Yes.
it with that reverence, I think, at least for me, I can look at the moon and then I can think of like my mother or my partner or the women in my life that I value. And then I can also look at them and then like a part of my symbolic way of thinking will see the moon in them, or whatever it may be. It's this kind of
Mhm.
overlay of stuff.
Yeah.
Not necessarily explicit, but implicit, I think, in the relational aspect. And yeah, I'm curious then of how maybe your relationship with the feminine, both inner and outer, has developed.
Yeah. Beautiful. Profoundly, man. Yeah. Like, it's so glad that you're bringing that up, and it's such a big piece to the whole thing, where much of my force was around this, yeah, relationship with the feminine. Like, it was disbalanced. I had marriage, 7-year marriage, 13-year long relationship that was just, there was unspoken things, things that just didn't get said. And then there was, just kind of builds and builds and builds. And then there's all the things, right? And these are all things that I had to go back and relook at and let go of a lot of things and purge out and all the things. But it's just when I sort of like look at the time spent in the jungle and all of what happened in those, it was all to rebalance. It was all a rebalancing of my relationship with the feminine. And when I look even further back, it's like, well, gosh, like our culture only ever really taught about a masculine god. Like we have a father figure, like my father, like father god, like all the things. And I'm not trying to like demonize that or anything like that. I do think that we get a pretty good image of what a wholesome, good father will look like, but without any real emphasis on what Mother Nature, what womb, and I think this is just why our culture feels so disconnected, is because we get disconnected from what the family unit really is. And it's like, and I would probably get some pushback from the people in my life of like, no, like family values and all these things. But I just think from a sort of like some sort of fundamental level, like it's being stripped away, this aspect of the feminine, our relationship to plants, our relationship to the material world, the mater, the mother. It's like we just make it all seem bad. It's in a way like in some areas, and I think some very important areas maybe is a better way to say it. It's just like, like I think if there was more openness and acceptance to it, like I wouldn't, like if it wasn't so forbidden when I was younger, maybe I, wouldn't have gravitated so hard towards it, or something like that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because obviously you talked about your kind of fundamental upbringing, and one of the things I heard you say through your kind of engagements with plant medicines, and I suppose maybe prior with, I guess, some inner reflection work, maybe some earlier kind of experimentation. But you talked about kind of spiritual awakening, forming your own relationship with God, and you said not your dad's God, not your mum's God, not the church's God, but your own relationship with God. And yeah, I think it's almost like this sort of circumambulating the kind of image of God, right? And so you grew up with it, family unit being important, that kind of focus on certain elements, which obviously were very beneficial to you. But
Totally.
then there's this deepening through life, through life's ruptures, through your myth, through your wrestling with God, really, in many senses. You're wrestling with the material world in how it unfolds through unfortunate events like, the passing of your brother, to the, slightly more minor ones like the injuries, through the ending of a 13-year relationship. That's kind of that, all of that's happening. You're wrestling with that. And then as a result of that, there is the deepening of, the reevaluation. Like Eric Neumann talks about what you're talking about, which is when Christianity came in kind of after alchemy, there was the patriarchal reevaluation of the material world, and man symbolically murdered the mother. And it became this very, monotheistic, patriarchal, masculine God. And the feminine was kind of stripped of its spiritual significance in transformation. And it seems like you kind of grew up in that kind of worldview, that ontology, and then you found your way back. And you talk about how the hero's journey is of importance, and that seems to be what's happened. You've kind of had these trial and tribulations throughout life. You've gone into the depths, kind of resurfaced with the kind of treasure being perhaps this new eyes, right? And the new perception that kind of integrates the feminine into your worldview. but still holds place for the old stuff, it sounds like. Is that fair to say?
Totally. Totally, yeah, and I always just kinda like as you're saying that, like, I wonder, just how much, my own mother just, like, continuously showing up for, like, being a mother, is not perfect by any means, but just, like, unconditionally loves me and loves my dad, their relationship is not perfect, but it's like, they it just was an imprint from a very young age, or probably an age I don't ever have very many memories from, something like that, so I think that example probably is helpful, but I think also it's worth saying that, like, the relationship with my mom was, like, severed in a lot of ways. Like, maybe we can just talk about, like, birth and the way that our birth culture is kinda traumatic for mothers. Like, it's always fear it's all like, everything around birth in our culture is so fear-based. It's like, I mean, just, yeah, from severing, umbilical cords too early to C-sections to putting weird, it's just kinda wild the more I, like, learn about these times of, like, how much of those imprints could really, like, carry on, but I think much of my childhood was very much like I had a present mother who was all for me and wanted to see me thrive, and so, like, I think ultimately, like, I sit in ceremony and I feel the divine mother's presence and I start to understand, oh, it's like a relationship with the mother, like the archetype of a mother. It's like the mother, and it's like, oh, like some of my energy just comes from, like, I'm just a child trying to, like, show mom what I can do, It's like I like that. Like, I'm like so beating to the beat of my own drum and, like, all these things, it feels primal and child and like, and so it's like puts more emphasis behind what I'm doing. It's just like this deeper connection to the mother, but then totally shifts and makes really interesting and profound impacts in my relationship with my earth mother, my biological mother. And it's just like, it's beautiful. And I yeah, I just think, it's more about the meaning that we draw from it, There's
Mm.
this quote from this gal on Instagram called Sophia Cycles. I just, like, kinda wanted to bring up, but it's like her quote from Edward Energier is that she posted was, "The process of individuation doesn't make life easier, but it makes it more meaningful, and it's not to escape. The path isn't to escape, but it's to deepen our engagement with the realities of suffering and growth and self-discovery." So it's like, yeah, you might have all this shit with your mom and dad, but you work through it. You work through it. You go deeper on it. If you wanna have a relationship with something, you have to go deeper on it. My relationship with wrestling and grappling has not always been meaningful. I fucking hated wrestling my freshman year of college. I was cutting so much weight. The team called me a Holocaust victim on the team. Like, they were just joking and stuff. But I was so sucked down, so malnourished, but all for the team and all for, like, this, like, like heroic sort of thing where I was gonna make weight for the team. But it just, like, so bad for me, so bad for me. And it's like, there was times like that where I was like I had eating disorders. I was throwing up all the time. I was and it wasn't long after that my brother passed away after the season. It's just like, just this really confusing, messed up time, So, I think it's
Yeah.
more about making meaning of it, like
Yeah,
deepening
and
it.
I really like kind of the quote there, and also something I heard you say on another podcast as well, which you said through your journey of kind of inner exploration, more meaning has become apparent in the past as you've discovered stuff about yourself or transformed stuff about yourself in the present. And I guess that's kind of what you're touching on there with you have this encounter with the archetypal mother, this deepening of relationship with the archetypal mother. And then as the archetypal relationship transforms, your personal relationship to your birth
Totally.
mother transforms as well. And that stretches across time all of a sudden. And I've seen that as well with myself, that past events all of a sudden are opened up on a more deeper symbolic level, and you can see not only in singular events but also in the interconnection of events. We talked a lot about that, on this episode, with kind of the themes that have come up in your life around wrestling, your dear brother Jacob. And yeah, it's interesting. I love stories like yours because they're just, to me, they are a testament to why living a symbolic life or exploring the symbolic life in your own life is so fruitful and worthwhile to do, because the parts of your life that may feel meaningless, that may just feel like the mundane, are probably rich in meaning. It may not be now that you see it. It may be later down the line when it's all
Yeah.
connected with events that are yet to happen, or through correlations you are yet to see, or depths you are yet to reveal because you haven't engaged with that archetypal inner element of yourself in a certain way yet. But it's all there. And yeah, it's, for me, that's the goal, man. Seeing that in your story is so cool, because I think it just supports these ideas as something worth exploring. So yeah, it's cool to hear.
Appreciate
Okay, so I'm going to go with, let's talk one last topic before we bring this thing home. So you were talking earlier about initiation,
it.
how we're kind of lacking that maybe in like masculine culture. I agree. I've talked about this with the great James Hollis, who I was lucky enough to have on the show.
Saw that you had him on the show. Yeah, I noted that one when I listened to that.
He's a legend, absolute legend. Yeah, and he talks how men lack this initiation, I guess, from adolescence into adulthood. And I guess in many ways you've had that. I mean, one of those ways that can happen from, as Dr. Hollis said, is through like the military that can act as a kind of initiation, but it can sometimes be too rigid in certain ways. And I imagine in the same way through combat sports, you've kind of had this container perhaps to develop more into a man in many of the ways that we've talked about. Where do you see culture nowadays struggles with that and lack of that, perhaps?
Yeah. Yeah, I it's missing, man. Like it's gone. Like I don't know where it is, honestly, other than obviously there is a path for anybody committed to it. I think it means some commitment, and I think like there's something there's a way. I don't want to be like, oh, it's just like there's nothing, but there is hope and a lot of it. But it's when I look at it, it seems very bleak. Like there is not a lot unless you have a solid family foundation. Your fathers like can bring you into hunting, or it can bring you into wrestling or sport. These are all ways in which we will like find initiations, but it's like initiations happen so, like continuously. Like I'm still being initiated into different levels of things. So it's like understanding, the importance of, you know, like following through with what you say you're going to do, to going through the process, to being witnessed while you fail, to being, like tested. That is what it is. It's a test. And I think there are so many ways to opt out, and there are so many ways to numb, and there are so many things stealing our life force that would have us connected to any sense of meaning. And it yeah, so I mean, I'm wrestling with it. It's like, masculinity is not missing. Like that is just a principle. Like you may want to be masculine and try to replicate what you have seen, and that might come off as toxic or something like that. But it's like it's it's more of a just like it feels like a more there needs to be more presence and more mindfulness around these ideas of initiation and challenges, and then how does that support life? Like, how are we setting up environments so that children can be born safely, that families can raise children safely, that communities are practicing regenerative agriculture, or, you know, whatever it is that supports life. We're missing it because, like, our culture is so driven on these performance, like, it's the masculine drive, the patriarchy of, like, produce, 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 consume, 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 consume. But for what? Like, what happens? Like, we do that until the bees die, and then we're dead. We do
Mm.
that until the Amazon's gone, and then we do that until there's so much plastic in the ocean, and then there's
Yeah, I think I agree. It's not that necessarily that these traits that are perhaps traits of the masculine principle are inherently bad. It's that too much of anything without its kind of healthy opposite is going to lead to harm and destruction, you know. And you've rightly kind of covered it there from various different levels, be that on the personal level in terms of how we perhaps engage with each other. You know, if we aren't able to access the kind of the relational aspects of our psyche that is the feminine. You know, I talk a lot about this on the channel, and I often get reactive comments of people feeling that when I say the feminine, I mean sort of what they perceive as feminine qualities, but I'm
Mhm.
talking about human qualities, you know, things like the relational, the ability to
Yes.
relate, to connect with other human beings. And archetypically that is feminine. And if we have these kind of masculine outward consciousness orientated things that are very good and hold lots of benefits, without that we lose touch, and then we can cause harm to ourselves, harm to the environment, like you say, when it goes up onto the kind of cultural level. And that, I mean, that's a myth we've been living in since that patriarchal reevaluation, since the Enlightenment. Lots of
Totally.
progress, technology. Where is that getting us? We are harming the planet. We are harming each other in many ways, be it directly or indirectly. And yeah, there needs to be a way of balancing those two positions, right? You know, it's not a zero sum game. I
Yeah.
think, and I think you would agree, we're not trying to negate masculinity and lose masculine qualities. We still need those. They just need to be, like anything, held in balance with
Yeah,
everything
and
else.
reverence, like you said earlier, I think that was profound what you said. It's like it's a choice to, like, set and hold reverence for something, and I think that's one really powerful aspect of these ceremonies is it's actually kinda terrifying, you know? You don't really know what's gonna happen. You are kinda giving yourself over and surrendering, like, there's no other option after you drink that ayahuasca, like.
And that's another aspect of it as well that I think is really interesting about the kind of psychedelic experience. Some of my more profound experiences were linked to these feminine kind of archetypes, be it my own anima, be it a kind of larger archetypal energy. I had lots of experiences orientated around kind of figures of like Kali from Hindu
Oh,
mythology and Sophia from like Gnosticism, with like little knowledge, but
yes.
it's how the image presented to me. And I can say, especially around the Kali kind of relationship, there is a relationship that I still cultivate within myself to this day.
Mhm.
Powerful. It
Yes.
is awe-inspiring, face melting, holding on to the chair, beauty, power, destruction, creation in the feminine. And that's another aspect, I think, that perhaps our culture doesn't realize when we talk about reverence for the feminine, that it is not reverence for their perception of what the feminine is. It's reverence for this archetypal feminine that is not this weak, lesser thing. It's this extremely powerful, extremely potent, transformative power within ourselves and within our culture. And that is what we need, I think, a lot more of. And I think through the psychedelic experience or through these altered states of consciousness, however you get there, it might be through yoga or something else, you can really see, like you said, why you're giving this thing reverence. It doesn't become a kind of token trivial act. It's like, I have to give this thing reverence because it is so awe-inspiring that I can barely even look at it. I'm struggling to like
Yeah.
hold what this is. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, that's what I think it's cultivated, like it's worship, man. Like it's like sitting in and soaking in and then listening. What is surrendering, to and like and then it's extrapolate it from a ceremony to your life as a ceremony, if we're talking about ayahuasca but it's like, yeah, like however you choose to sit with the feminine, it's like you actually have to sit with and let that sort of unfold. It does feel like it's like a rebalancing, if we talk about alchemy or what's like we have the masculine feminine principle, it's like sort of like allowing it to reorient you to her. I don't know that she expects you to be like perfectly oriented, as you begin the process, if that's what how you want to say it. But it's like that's the initiation, is to like set in and have some reverence and allow that sort of
Yeah,
rebalancing to take
I
place.
love that, man. There's a quote by Ramdas that always sticks with me, and he says, "She's a kind mother," and
Yeah,
I always think of that when perhaps I'm
beautiful, really.
having these moments of reflection. That
Yeah.
the the
Yeah,
great
yeah,
the great mother is a kind mother. So as you
yeah,
rightly said, nothing in you or out in the world is expecting you to be perfect first time. Sometimes the effort is enough, and if you're willing to try to explore that part of yourself, I think it's worthwhile, right?
yeah, I think so.
And the other thing that I really liked, and you said, I think it's a great way to round this up. You said like life as a ceremony, and I think that
Mm,
is a perfect way to look at it. There's a quote from Peter Kingsley as well that he has, something along the lines of, we think that the gods no longer speak to us in Western culture, but perhaps it's that we're just not listening. And yeah, I think what you're touching on there, that life as a ceremony, not expecting perfection, knowing that whatever forces that move in the world and within us don't expect perfection from us, and allowing yourself the space to listen to what comes up is a grand adventure that could hold a lot of fruit on it. And yeah, I love your story, man, and how you have gone about exploring that and doing that. So it's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure to hear. You've got some great insights and some great
thank
wisdom.
you
And I
so much.
really look forward to your Jungian work and the stuff you're gonna bring to the table there. I think it is needed, and I think you've lived a life that will add further depth, further clarity, and yeah, further insight to it. So I
Much
cannot wait for that.
appreciated, bro. I can't wait for when you come to California and hang out with me.
Oh, let's do it, man. Yeah, I'm all for this. I'll do the world tour at some point. I'm just gonna go around and see all the guests. But yeah, I'm totally game. Let's you can choke me out. We'll roll we'll roll, and I can get humbled yet again. So
Show you around.
yeah, so bring this thing home, Jared. Where can people find you currently if they want to?
Yeah, on Instagram, FeketaJJ. That's FeketejJ. I will be on this season 9 of the Professional Grapplers Federation. So there's a draft on the 4th. It's free on YouTube, and then the matches are every Wednesday, starting March 4th. Those are free on YouTube as well. But what they're doing is they're like kind of have the blueprint of like the NFL, the NBA, that kind of thing, where they're but for jujitsu. So it's newer, but they're doing a good job with it. Got invited to that. I'll be doing that. But no, I'm not really anywhere else. I mean, I am on other things, but I'm more active on Instagram as far as the jujitsu and this kind of stuff's concerned.
Awesome. Jared, thank you so much, man. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Appreciate you.
Thank you, brother.